Well, good afternoon. This is Pastor Jim. Today is Wednesday, January the 31st, and we're going to be taking a look at our gospel lesson for this week from Mark chapter 1. Kind of a shorter gospel lesson. At the outset, it might not seem that like there's a lot of deep theological material here, but as we know with God's Word, we don't have to dig too deep to find that God is communicating something to us through His Word. So we're going to just go ahead and jump into the reading. We're going to do a reading. A lot of our focus is going to be on one little part of the reading, where I'll just come out and say it. Peter commits the sin of idolatry. Peter messes up. It's not readily apparent, frankly, but what we see here is Peter not only doing what Peter does, but what we are sometimes prone to do when we presume to speak for God, or we presume to know what's better than what God has put forth. So that I'm just going to kind of throw that out there. So let's jump into the reading. And immediately he, Jesus, left the synagogue and entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law lay ill with a fever, and immediately they told him about her. And he came and took her by the hand and lifted her up, and the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sundown they brought to him all who were sick or oppressed by demons, and the whole city was gathered together at the door. And he healed many who were sick with various diseases, and cast out many demons, and he would not permit the demons to speak, because they knew him. And rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. And Simon and those who were with him searched for him. And they found him and said to him, "Everyone is looking for you." And he said to them, "Let us go on to the next towns, that I may preach there also, for that is why I came out." And he went throughout all Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and casting out demons. Well, there we go. A couple words of note that I think are important to note when we take a look at this. One is just another mention of synagogue. I know we talked about this a lot last week in the history of the synagogue, but synagogue's the first sort of historical indication we have of synagogues being present. It's around the 3rd or 4th century BC in what we call the intertestamental period. And we know synagogues were essentially buildings where people studied the law, they studied the Torah and the Ten Commandments, they worshiped God, and it was also sort of a community center and sometimes a hotel for people traveling. And so that's synagogues. And so Jesus preaching in the synagogue and visiting synagogues would be something rabbis did. And secondly, you'll notice in the reading that Peter's mother-in-law is healed. And now this sometimes comes as a surprise to people that Peter had a wife. He had to if he had a mother-in-law, right? And we don't know much about Peter's wife. Eusebius of Caesarea, in his History of the Church, he quotes Clement of Alexandria, who claimed Peter's wife was executed for her faith by the Roman authorities. And others suggest perhaps that Peter was a widower when he met Jesus. I made a little joke at Bible study. I'll just throw it out here. I don't know if it's funny or not, but it makes sense that Peter had a wife because he was so good at denying things. I'll just let that percolate in your mind a little bit. And so we continue. Now Simon's mother-in-law lay ill with a fever, and immediately they told him about her. And he, Jesus, came and took her by the hand and lifted her up, and the fever left her, and she began to serve them. And I threw out that word, diakoneo is the Greek word for serve. Diakoneo, it's where we get the word deacon or deaconess. Now some have posited that this is actually demeaning to Peter's mother-in-law, the very fact that the moment that she becomes well, she just begins to serve. Demeaning in a sense towards women or what, but know this. She is doing what all of us Christians are called to do, and that is knowing that Christ has healed us, we serve others. We diakoneo others. And perhaps, maybe even Peter's mother-in-law is the first deaconess we have in the church. A lot of people always point to Stephen later on in the book of Acts, but perhaps she's serving. She's serving, she's doing what the Lord wants, and she's serving others. Nothing demeaning about that at all. And that evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick or oppressed by demons, and the whole city was gathered together at the door. And he healed many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons, and he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. Now, we see this throughout the New Testament, that Jesus often clashed heads with the religious authorities of his day in regards to what I would call their man-made Sabbath regulations. Their interpretations of what could and couldn't be done on the Sabbath. And Jesus will tell them, look, I am Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus is Yahweh in the flesh. He created the Sabbath, right? And so what we see is when the sun in the Sabbath started at sundown on Friday, and it continued till sundown on Saturday. And so people, it makes sense that they would wait until sundown to bring people to Jesus. But what we know, and this is just a reading from Mark chapter 3 in regards to the Sabbath. We know how the religious authorities were trying to use the Sabbath against Jesus. And from Mark 3 we read, "And he entered the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. And they watched Jesus to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath so they might accuse him. And then a couple verses later, the Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him." And also another question. It reads that he did not permit the demons to speak, which is very interesting, I think. He didn't permit them to speak. Now, we see this throughout the New Testament, that perhaps Jesus does a healing, or often when he confesses who he is as Messiah and what that means, he'll then tell people to not say anything. It's called the messianic secret, right? And I think this is part of it. Why doesn't he let the demons speak? Well, it says because they knew him. The demons knew exactly who Jesus was. And in Mark's gospel, the titles they use for Jesus, the demons call him the Holy One of God, or later on in Mark 6, the Son of the Most High God. Maybe in our own sinful hearts we might think, well, the demons are saying good things in that thing. Shouldn't they speak, so that Jesus is known? But for whatever reason, Jesus didn't permit him to speak. Perhaps he didn't want the gospel message being brought forth by demons, but also I think he wasn't ready to give people the full teaching. He had an earthly ministry to complete yet. So he didn't let the demons speak. And rising early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went to a desolate place, and there he prayed. And we see Jesus doing this often, going to a quiet place to pray. And I found this picture, and I really like this one, because I think this is a picture of Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. And I think this painting here really reflects the pain that Jesus had when he was praying. That he was praying to connect himself to the Father, and he did this all the time. And there's something, a teaching lesson for us there as well, to keep in prayer, especially in difficult times, but at all times to keep God close in prayer. And here's we get to this is really kind of the meat of what I want to focus on. And Simon and those who were with him searched for him, and they found him and said to him, "Everyone is looking for you." So a careful look at that word searched. Kata dioko. It only occurs here in the New Testament. But when we find this word in the Old Testament, in almost every instance it has a negative connotation, meaning it's either to hunt or to persecute or to follow with malicious intent. So with that in mind, I think that's kind of perking our ears up, that Peter, in his searching for Jesus, wasn't with the best of intentions. They woke up, Jesus wasn't there, they went to find him. Why were they searching for him? Well, it's revealed in the very next verse. And they found him, and they said to him, "Everyone is looking for you." Everyone is looking for you. What's the big deal with that? Well, Jesus had a mission to proclaim the active reign of the kingdom of God, to proclaim himself as Messiah, to live and to die and to be resurrected on the third day. He wasn't going to let anyone get in the way. And what is Peter doing here? It's very subtle, but in a sense, Peter is saying to Jesus, what are you doing praying in a desolate place? You just impressed the entire town of Capernaum. Everyone wants more. That's where you should be. It's almost as if Peter is sort of acting like a public relations person, or he's trying to handle Jesus, right? Saying, and in Peter's mind, the best way to embark upon a ministry is to build off these miracles because he's becoming so popular. And do you see how Peter's own pride causes him to commit idolatry, where he places himself in the position of God? The prideful person exhibits self-centered thinking that can be expressed by, I want it done my way, in my time, when I want it. Instead of trusting God, we trust our own judgments. That's where pride turns into idolatry. And a couple other quotes that I found. One from John Calvin, where he writes in his Institutes, man's mind, full as it is of pride and boldness, dares to imagine a God according to its own capacity, as it sluggishly plods, indeed is overwhelmed with the crassest ignorance. It conceives an unreality and an empty appearance as God. And Luther addresses this in the Heidelberg Catechism when he says, having or inventing something in which to put our trust in is an idol, instead of or in addition to the only true God who has revealed himself in his word. So in a sense, and we've got to be careful here, while we're pointing our finger at Peter, we need to make sure we're allowing the law of God work on our heart, because we're all prone to this. We're all prone to this, of recreating God in our own image, turning him into a cosmic Santa Claus, if you will, who knows if we've been bad or good, so we don't have to do anything, and in the end, we all get presents, right? All of these things, all of this pride and this arrogance. And for Peter, and it's not the first time he does it, and it's not the last. What are you doing, Jesus? You need to be out with the crowds, working the crowd, building up your public image instead of being alone away from everyone praying. Later, we know, Jesus is going to confess to them, he's going to reveal to them precisely who he is, that he is the Messiah, he is the Son of God, and the Messiah must suffer and die and on the third day be raised. And then Peter rebukes him and again says, no. Working as that public relations guy, he's trying to handle Jesus. You can't say that thing, you can't say. And if you remember Jesus' response to him then, get behind me, Satan. Get behind me, adversary. Don't presume to know what God knows. And then Jesus said to them, let us go on to the next town that I may preach there also. For that is why I came out. And he went throughout all Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and casting out demons. Very clear here. Jesus is setting the stage for what he's going to do in his ministry, and he's not going to permit anyone to get in the way, even those closest to him, even his very own disciples, who will over and over again try and tell Jesus how he should be Jesus. And the warning here, I think, for all of us is to search your own heart for those times when we try to recreate God in our own image to suit our needs. Well, there it is, Mark 1. I'll be preaching on that this evening as well as Sunday, and I thank you certainly for your time. And in Michigan, it's a snowy and gray. Every now and then the sun pokes out, but we're being told the sun's coming out next week, so that's something to look forward to. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord look upon you with favor and give you peace. Receive the Lord's blessing. Be a blessing to others. Love you guys and hope to see you soon. God bless.